took my wife's phone in for repair. The technician, a family friend, pulled me aside and said, "Cancel the cards and change the locks immediately." Confused, I asked, "WHT happened?" He showed me the screen. I found these scheduled messages. "I'm Marcus Turner, 44 years old, and I live in Portland, Maine, which is basically the kind of place where people argue about whether Dunkin' Donuts or local coffee shops make better brew, and honestly, that's about as exciting as it gets most days. My wife, Laura, is what I affectionately call a graceful chaos tornado, which sounds romantic until you realize she literally destroys everything she touches with the kind of efficiency that would make a demolition crew jealous. The woman goes through phones like a teenager goes through TikTok trends, breaking at least one device per month, and I'm not exaggerating. Last month, she dropped her iPhone in the toilet while trying to photograph our cat, Mr. Whiskers, who was doing absolutely nothing interesting. The month before that, she left it on the roof of her car and drove off like she was auditioning for Fast and Furious, Suburban Mom Edition. I've watched this woman crack more screens than a hockey player loses teeth, and somehow, I'm always the one who ends up dealing with the aftermath. Me? I'm the responsible one in this marriage, the guy who actually remembers that trash day is Thursday, not whenever the bins start smelling like a crime scene. I'm the one who pays the bills on time, schedules the dentist appointments that Laura swears she'll remember but never does, and makes sure we have toilet paper before we're down to using napkins like we're camping in our own bathroom. My friends call me Steady, which is code for boring, and my brother-in-law once introduced me at a barbecue as the guy who probably irons his jeans, which I don't, for the record, but I understood his point. I'm not the life of the party. I'm the guy who makes sure the party doesn't end with someone getting arrested or the house burning down. I'm the designated driver of life, basically, and I've made peace with that role because somebody has to be the adult, and it sure as hell isn't going to be Laura. So when I walked into our kitchen on a random Tuesday morning in October and saw her phone sitting there on the counter, screen shattered into what looked like a spider web designed by a drunk spider, I didn't even sigh. I just picked it up, looked at the damage, and thought to myself, well, here we go again. The thing was barely holding together, with little shards of glass threatening to fall out every time I tilted it, and I could see her lock screen photo. Us at the beach last summer, both looking happy and sunburned, peeking through the cracks like it was trying to escape. Laura was upstairs getting ready for work, probably trying on her fifth outfit of the morning because nothing ever feels right, and I figured this would be a nice surprise for her. You know, the kind of gesture that gets you bonus points in the marriage scoreboard that every husband keeps mentally, even though we pretend we don't care about that stuff. I decided right then and there that I'd take it to Eddie's repair shop downtown and get it fixed while she was at work. Eddie's this local tech wizard who's been fixing our electronics for years, the kind of guy who can resurrect a dead laptop with nothing but a screwdriver and what I suspect might be actual witchcraft. He once fixed our toaster with duct tape and a paperclip, and the damn thing still works 3 years later, so I trust him with pretty much anything that has a power button. Plus, he's cheap, which matters when your wife treats phones like they're disposable cameras from the 90s. I texted Laura to let her know I was taking care of it, got a bunch of heart emojis in response because that's her love language apparently, and headed out the door feeling pretty good about myself. The drive to Eddie's shop took maybe 15 minutes through Portland's downtown area, past the coffee shops where people sit with their MacBooks pretending to write novels, past the boutique stores that sell $30 candles that smell like coastal mornings or whatever marketing nonsense they come up with, and past the harbor where tourists take pictures like they've never seen water before. I parked in front of Tech Haven, which is what Eddie calls his shop, even though it's basically a cluttered room that smells like circuit boards and energy drinks, and walked in to find him hunched over someone's computer like a surgeon performing open-heart surgery. He looked up, saw me with the phone, and just nodded because we've done this dance enough times that he knows the routine. "Laura again?" he asked, taking the phone from me and examining it with the kind of professional assessment that doctors probably use when looking at x-rays. "When is it not, Laura?" I replied, and he laughed that knowing laugh that married guys share when they talk about their wives' quirks. He told me it would take about 30 minutes, maybe an hour tops, and I should grab a coffee and come back. So I did exactly that, walking down to the Dunkin' on the corner because I'm a creature of habit and also because their coffee is consistent, which is all I really want from life at this point. I sat there scrolling through my phone, checking emails about work stuff that could definitely wait, looking at pictures of my kids even though I'd just seen them at breakfast, and generally killing time like every other middle-aged dude in America. I wasn't thinking about anything dramatic or life-changing. I was literally wondering if I should get an apple fritter or if that would count as breaking my half-hearted attempt at eating healthier that I'd started on Monday and would probably abandon by Friday. When my phone rang and Eddie's name popped up on the screen, I figured he was calling to tell me the phone was ready or maybe that he needed some specific information about Laura's account. I answered while taking a sip of coffee, casual as anything, ready to just pick up the phone and head home. But Eddie's voice came through the speakers sounding weird, like strained and quiet, and he said, "Marcus, you need to come back to the shop right now." Not in a "hey, it's ready" kind of way, but in a "something is very, very wrong" kind of way that made my stomach drop faster than Laura drops phones. I drove back to his shop, probably breaking a few traffic laws, my mind racing through possibilities. Did he find something illegal on her phone? Was there some kind of malware? Did she secretly have a gambling problem I didn't know about? When I got there, the shop door was locked, which was weird because it was the middle of the day, and I had to knock before Eddie opened it, looked both ways down the street like he was in a spy movie, and pulled me inside. Just a nice husband move, right? That's what I thought when I picked up that phone. Just being a good partner, fixing something broken, earning those marriage points. Yeah, that's exactly what I thought too. Right before my perfectly boring, predictable marriage went full Netflix thriller and I realized that sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is be helpful. Eddie locked the door behind me with this weird urgency that you usually only see in movies when someone's about to reveal that aliens are real or the government is listening through your microwave. And I'm standing there in his cramped little shop thinking maybe the guy finally snapped from inhaling too many soldering fumes. I mean, Eddie's always been a bit eccentric. The kind of dude who wears the same Star Wars t-shirt 3 days in a row and thinks energy drinks count as a food group. But this was different. His face had gone completely pale, like he'd just watched someone kick a puppy, and his hands were actually shaking as he gestured for me to follow him to the back workbench where Laura's phone was sitting under one of those bright LED lamps he uses for delicate repair work. "Eddie, what's going on, man?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light because honestly, I thought maybe he'd found some embarrassing photos or discovered that Laura had been texting her book club friends about how I snore like a congested walrus, which I do, but that's not exactly classified information. Did you accidentally delete something? Because if it's her contacts, I can probably recover most of them from the cloud, and she won't even notice if we lose a few random numbers from people she met at yoga 3 years ago and never talked to again. He didn't laugh at my attempt at humor, which should have been my first clue that this wasn't about lost contacts or accidentally wiped photos. Instead, he picked up the phone with 2 fingers like it was contaminated with some kind of deadly virus and turned the screen toward me. "Marcus, I need you to listen to me very carefully and not freak out, okay? Can you do that for me? Can you promise me you won't completely lose your shit right here in my shop?" Now, when someone asks you to promise not to freak out, that's pretty much a guarantee that you're about to freak out, right? It's like when a doctor says you might feel a little pressure, which actually means this is going to hurt like hell, and you'll probably cry. I nodded anyway because what else are you going to do? And Eddie pulled up Laura's messaging app, which I noticed had way more conversations than I expected because apparently my wife texts more people in a day than I talk to in a month. So I was replacing the screen, right? Eddie started explaining in this fast, nervous way that made him sound like he'd had about 6 espressos. And the phone kept buzzing with notifications, which is normal, whatever. But then I noticed something weird in her notification center. There were these scheduled messages, like a bunch of them, all queued up to send on specific dates over the next few months. At first, I thought maybe it was birthday reminders or anniversary stuff, because people do that. My mom schedules messages to herself so she remembers to water her plants, which is sad but also kind of genius. I was starting to get impatient because Eddie tends to ramble when he's nervous, and I had about 1,000 things to do that day, including a conference call at 2 that I definitely couldn't miss. Okay, so she schedules messages. Is that really worth locking the door and acting like we're in a Jason Bourne movie? Maybe she's planning a surprise party or something. Eddie's expression shifted from nervous to something that looked like genuine fear mixed with pity, which is never a combination you want to see on someone's face when they're talking about your spouse. "Marcus, these aren't party invitations. These are... Look, I'm just going to show you, because if I try to explain it, you're going to think I'm making it up or that I've finally lost my mind from spending too much time alone with broken electronics. He tapped the screen a few times and pulled up the scheduled messages folder, which I didn't even know existed because I'm technologically competent enough to send texts and check email, but I'm not exactly hacking into the Pentagon over here. What I saw made my brain basically short-circuit like one of Eddie's broken computers. There were dozens of messages, all carefully dated and timed, stretching out over the next 4 months. The first one was scheduled to go to her sister 3 weeks from now, and it said something about how I'd been having memory issues lately, and she was worried about early-onset dementia. Another one, set for mid-December, was addressed to our family doctor asking about cognitive testing for Marcus and mentioning how I'd been forgetting important things and acting confused. I scrolled through more of them, my heart doing this weird thing where it felt like it was beating too fast and too slow at the same time, and each message was worse than the last. There was one to our insurance company asking about policy details and specifically mentioning that I was the primary policyholder. There was one to her friend Jennifer talking about how difficult it was watching me decline and how she didn't know how much longer she could handle the stress. There was even one to our kids, our actual children, explaining that Dad was sick and they needed to prepare themselves for difficult decisions ahead. What the hell is this? I heard myself say, except my voice sounded weird and distant like it was coming from someone else's body. Is this some kind of joke? Is Laura planning some elaborate prank that's going to end up on YouTube with everyone laughing at how gullible I am? Eddie shook his head slowly, and I could see he genuinely wished it was a prank because that would make this whole situation so much simpler and less terrifying. Keep scrolling, Marcus. It gets worse. Like, significantly worse. Like, call the police and maybe a lawyer worse. I didn't want to keep scrolling. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to just put the phone down, walk out of the shop, go home, and pretend this never happened. But I kept going because apparently, I'm the kind of idiot who can't resist picking at a scab even when I know it's going to hurt. The messages got progressively more detailed and more disturbing. There was one scheduled for January, 2 months away, to our financial advisor asking about transferring assets and what happens to joint accounts in the event of Marcus's passing. Another one to a real estate agent asking about selling our house and what the property value was in the current market. There was even one to a funeral home, which I couldn't even bring myself to read completely because my hands were shaking too much to hold the phone steady. Eddie, I said, and my voice came out as barely more than a whisper. Eddie, what am I looking at here? Please tell me there's some reasonable explanation for this that doesn't involve my wife of 17 years planning to kill me and make it look like I died from some mysterious degenerative brain disease. He ran his hand through his hair, which was already standing up in weird directions from him, doing that same gesture probably 50 times since he discovered this nightmare. Marcus, I think you need to cancel your credit cards and change your locks. Like today. Like right now. I'm not trying to be dramatic or paranoid, but this looks like a textbook setup for insurance fraud and possibly murder. I watch a lot of true crime documentaries, and this is literally the playbook. First, you establish that the person is mentally declining so nobody questions weird behavior. Then you get access to finances and insurance. Then something tragic happens, and everyone just thinks it was a sad but inevitable outcome of the disease. I actually laughed at that point, which was probably not the appropriate response, but my brain couldn't process what it was seeing, so it just defaulted to hysterical laughter. Eddie, are you high? Did you eat some edibles before I got here? Because this is insane. Laura's not a murderer. She's a kindergarten teacher who cries during dog food commercials and once made me drive 20 minutes out of our way to avoid hitting a turtle crossing the road. She doesn't even kill spiders. She catches them in cups and releases them outside while talking to them about how they're just trying to live their lives. You're telling me that woman is planning to murder me for insurance money. But even as I said it, I could hear how desperate and unconvincing I sounded, like I was trying to convince myself more than Eddie. Because the evidence was right there on the screen, time-stamped and scheduled and meticulously planned. This wasn't some spontaneous decision or emotional outburst. This was calculated. This was organized. This was someone who had sat down, probably multiple times, and carefully crafted a narrative that would make my death look natural and expected. Eddie put his hand on my shoulder in that awkward way that guys do when they're trying to be supportive but don't really know how to express emotions properly. I'm sorry, man. I really am. I wish I was high, and I wish this was all some crazy misunderstanding. But you need to take this seriously. You need to figure out what you're going to do, and you need to do it fast, because I don't know when she's planning to actually, make her move. I stood there in that cramped repair shop, staring at my wife's cracked phone screen, and realized that I'd just stumbled into the most dangerous situation of my entire boring, predictable life, all because I decided to be a nice husband and get her phone fixed. I drove home from Eddie's shop in what I can only describe as a fugue state, which is a fancy psychological term I learned from some documentary I watched at 2 in the morning when I couldn't sleep, and it basically means your brain is functioning but you're not really present in your own body. I don't remember hitting a single stoplight or turning onto our street or even parking in the driveway, but suddenly I was sitting in my car staring at our house. This perfectly normal Cape Cod-style place with blue shutters that Laura picked out 3 years ago because she said they were coastal chic, and thinking about how everything I thought I knew about my life was potentially a complete fabrication. The lawn needed mowing, which I'd been putting off because it's October and I kept thinking maybe I could squeeze out one more week before winter hit. And there were pumpkins on the front porch that Laura had arranged in what she called an autumn tableau, and everything looked so goddamn normal that I almost convinced myself Eddie had been wrong. But then I remembered those scheduled messages, each one a carefully placed domino in what was apparently a plan to make me disappear, and I felt my stomach turn over like I'd eaten bad seafood. I had Laura's phone in my jacket pocket. Eddie had insisted I take it, said something about evidence and documentation that I barely processed. And I kept touching it through the fabric like I needed to confirm it was real and not some hallucination brought on by a gas leak or a brain tumor or whatever else could explain this absolute insanity. Laura's car was already in the driveway, which meant she'd gotten home from work before me, and I could see lights on in the kitchen through the window. For a brief, wild moment, I considered just driving away, maybe going to a hotel or my brother's place in Boston or possibly just Mexico, because I'd always wanted to see the pyramids and now seemed like an excellent time to become an expat. But that's not how I'm wired, unfortunately. I'm the guy who confronts problems head-on, even when those problems might literally involve my wife trying to poison me or push me down the stairs, or whatever creative method she'd chosen from what I imagined was probably a very detailed Pinterest board titled, "How to Murder Your Husband and Get Away with It." I walked into the house trying to act normal, which is incredibly difficult when you're simultaneously terrified and furious and also questioning your own sanity. Laura was in the kitchen cooking, and the smell hit me immediately. Lasagna, my favorite, which she makes with this ricotta mixture that's probably got enough calories to require its own insurance policy, but tastes like something angels would eat if angels weren't too busy with harps and clouds. She was humming along to some song playing from her iPad, probably something from her Cooking Vibes playlist that's mostly just acoustic covers of 80s songs, and she looked so normal and happy and completely not like someone who was planning to become a widow by January that I felt this cognitive dissonance that was almost physically painful. "Hey, honey," she called out when she heard me come in, turning around with this bright smile that I'd seen 1,000 times over 17 years of marriage. "You're home earlier than I expected. How was your day? I'm making lasagna because I know Tuesdays are rough for you with all those client meetings, and I thought you could use some comfort food." I stood there in the doorway like an idiot, trying to figure out if this was genuine affection or if she was fattening me up before the slaughter like some twisted version of Hansel and Gretel. "My day was interesting," I managed to say, hanging up my jacket carefully so she wouldn't hear the phone in my pocket. "Got a lot done. You know how it is. Same old corporate nonsense that nobody actually cares about, but everyone pretends is vitally important." She laughed at that, which she always does when I make cynical comments about my job and insurance risk assessment, which is exactly as boring as it sounds, but pays well enough that we can afford her phone-breaking habit. "Well, dinner will be ready in about 20 minutes. Why don't you go change and relax? You look stressed. Is everything okay?" The concern in her voice sounded genuine, which was somehow worse than if she'd been cold or distant, because it meant either she was an incredible actress or I was losing my mind, and Eddie had completely misinterpreted a bunch of innocent scheduled reminders. Except there was nothing innocent about a message to a funeral home, and I knew that. But my brain was still desperately trying to find an escape hatch from this nightmare. I went upstairs and changed into comfortable clothes, moving on autopilot while my mind raced through every possible scenario. Maybe Laura was planning a surprise intervention because she genuinely thought I was sick. Maybe she'd been talking to WebMD too much and convinced herself I had early dementia based on the fact that I sometimes forget where I put my keys. Except that didn't explain the insurance inquiries or the real estate agent or the funeral home, and I knew I was grasping at straws that didn't exist. When I came back downstairs, the table was set with our nice plates, the ones we usually only use for company or holidays, and there were candles lit because apparently this was going to be a romantic Last Supper situation. Laura had opened a bottle of red wine, some Cabernet that we'd been saving from our anniversary last year, and she poured me a glass with a smile that made my paranoia spike to levels that probably required medication. I sat down across from her, and she served the lasagna with this flourish like she was on the Food Network, and it looked perfect, golden and bubbly, and exactly like it always did when she made it. She was talking about her day, something about one of her kindergarten students eating glue and another one announcing that his parents were getting divorced during show and tell. And normally, I would have been engaged and asking questions and making jokes about how 5-year-olds have no filter. But instead, I was analyzing every word she said, looking for hidden meanings or threats or some indication that this was all part of her master plan. "You've been so forgetful lately," she said casually, taking a sip of her wine, and my entire body went rigid because that was exactly the narrative she was building in those scheduled messages. "Remember last week when you couldn't find your wallet and it was in the fridge? And you forgot about our dinner with the Hendersons even though I reminded you 3 times. I had forgotten about that dinner, which was actually true, but now I couldn't tell if it was normal middle-aged forgetfulness or if she'd been deliberately setting me up by giving me wrong dates or gaslighting me into thinking I was losing my memory. "I've just been stressed with work," I said, picking up my fork and staring at the lasagna like it might contain arsenic or rat poison or whatever household substance Google recommends for discreet murder. Laura kept talking, completely oblivious to my internal crisis. Or maybe she was just an Oscar-worthy actress. "I've been thinking we should sell the house," she said, and I nearly choked on the wine I'd just sipped, which tasted fine as far as I could tell. But then again, I don't know what poison tastes like, and hopefully I'll never find out. It's too big for just the 2 of us now that the kids are grown and moved out, and the maintenance is getting expensive. We could get a condo downtown, something modern and easy to take care of. What do you think?" What did I think? I thought my wife was systematically setting up every piece of her murder plan right in front of me while serving me comfort food and acting like we were just having a normal Tuesday night conversation about downsizing. I thought I was living in some alternate reality where the woman I'd shared a bed with for nearly 2 decades was capable of plotting my death with the same casual efficiency she used to plan birthday parties and vacation itineraries. "That's an interesting idea," I said slowly, forcing myself to take a bite of lasagna even though my appetite had completely vanished and everything tasted like cardboard mixed with terror. "We should definitely think about it. No rush though, right? I mean, the market's always fluctuating, and we'd want to time it properly to get the best value." She nodded enthusiastically, and I watched her eat her own food, which was reassuring because presumably she wouldn't poison something she was also eating, unless she developed immunity like the guy in The Princess Bride, which was a ridiculous thought, but at this point my brain was throwing out every possible scenario, no matter how absurd. We finished dinner making small talk about nothing important, and I smiled and nodded, and played the role of the oblivious husband while my mind worked overtime, trying to figure out my next move. Because if 41 years of life had taught me anything, it was this. Never show your hand until you've checked the other player's cards. And right now I needed to see exactly what game my wife was playing before I decided how to play mine. I didn't sleep that night, which probably wasn't a huge surprise considering I was lying next to someone who might be planning to smother me with a pillow or inject me with something while I was unconscious. And let me tell you, spousal paranoia is one hell of an insomnia cure. Laura was sleeping peacefully beside me, breathing in that steady rhythm that usually comforted me, but now sounded vaguely ominous. Like maybe she was dreaming about life insurance payouts and tropical vacations funded by my untimely demise. Every time she shifted or rolled over, I'd tense up like a neurotic cat, ready to bolt if she reached for anything that looked remotely weapon-adjacent. Around 3 in the morning, I gave up on the pretense of sleep and just lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to the house settle and thinking about how I'd somehow ended up in a situation that felt like a Lifetime movie crossed with a bad episode of Forensic Files. When my alarm went off at 6:30, I practically jumped out of bed with an enthusiasm I hadn't felt since college, which Laura commented on because apparently my sudden burst of morning energy was unusual enough to warrant observation. "Someone's chipper today," she said, stretching and yawning like a completely normal person who wasn't plotting murder. "Did you sleep well?" "Like a baby." I lied, because at this point lying seemed like a crucial survival skill, and if she could schedule messages about my fictional dementia, I could certainly pretend everything was peachy. "Just feeling energized, you know? Thought I'd get an early start on the day, maybe hit the gym before work." I don't go to the gym. I haven't been to a gym since 2019 when I had a membership I paid for but never used, which is basically the American dream in a nutshell. But it gave me an excuse to leave the house before Laura and get started on what I was mentally calling Operation Don't Die. I showered quickly, got dressed in my standard business casual uniform of khakis and a button-down shirt that Laura had bought me, because left to my own devices, I'd probably still be wearing the same clothes I wore in my 20s, and headed out with a travel mug of coffee that I'd watched myself pour, because I wasn't taking any chances with beverages anymore. My first stop was the public library, which opened at 8 and was staffed by my buddy Marion, who'd been the head librarian there for about 15 years and knew more about finding information than the entire FBI database combined. Marion was one of those people who'd fully embraced the librarian stereotype: wire-rimmed glasses, cardigans in every color of the rainbow, and an almost supernatural ability to locate obscure information using nothing but determination and what I suspected might be actual magic. We'd met years ago when I was researching something boring for work, and she'd helped me track down statistical reports that I didn't even know existed, and we'd stayed friends ever since, bonding over our mutual appreciation for true crime podcasts and the fact that we were both married to people who were significantly more social than we were. "Marcus Turner, as I live and breathe," she said when I walked in, looking up from her computer with a smile that faded pretty quickly when she saw my face. "Good Lord, you look like you haven't slept in a week. What's wrong? Did someone die?" "Not yet," I said, which was probably a weird response, but Marion had known me long enough to understand that I processed stress through dark humor. "But I need your help with something, and it's going to sound absolutely insane. So I need you to just roll with it and not ask too many questions until I've explained everything." We went to her office in the back, which was really just a converted storage closet with a desk and approximately 7,000 books stacked in precarious piles, and I told her everything. The phone repair, the scheduled messages, the dinner with Laura casually discussing selling the house, and my supposed memory problems, all of it. Marion listened without interrupting, which is a rare and valuable quality in a person, and when I finished, she just sat there for a moment processing before saying, "Okay, so your wife is either planning to kill you, or she's organizing the world's most elaborate and tasteless prank. Either way, we need to figure out what's actually going on before you do something rash like confront her or, I don't know, fake your own death and move to Guatemala." Guatemala wasn't on my list, but I'll add it, I said, and she rolled her eyes but pulled up her computer with the kind of determined expression that librarians get when they're about to research the hell out of something. "Let me see the phone," she said, and I handed over Laura's device, which I'd been carrying around like it was the Hope Diamond or some other priceless artifact that needed constant supervision. Marion started scrolling through the messages, her expression getting progressively more concerned, and then she started digging into Laura's email, using some password recovery trick that I didn't quite follow, but seemed slightly illegal and definitely outside the scope of normal librarian duties. What we found over the next 2 hours made my stomach sink lower than it had already been, which I didn't think was possible. Laura's email was a goldmine of information that I absolutely did not want to discover. There were dozens of messages to someone named L. Harding, who was apparently her business consultant, which was weird because Laura didn't have a business. She was a kindergarten teacher who occasionally sold crafts on Etsy, not exactly someone who needed professional consulting services. The emails were vague but troubling, lots of mentions about the plan and timeline, and securing assets that sounded less like legitimate business talk and more like dialogue from a heist movie. Marion, bless her detective-loving heart, started running background checks on this Harding person using library databases and public records that she had access to through various professional subscriptions. What came up was disturbing enough that I actually felt my hands go cold despite the stuffy warmth of Marion's office. Harding, full name Lydia Harding, had quite the colorful history. She'd been involved in multiple business ventures that had ended mysteriously, usually with her business partners either dead or bankrupt or both. There were news articles from different cities, all following the same basic pattern. Harding would partner with someone, convince them to restructure their assets or take out large insurance policies, and then something unfortunate would happen. A car accident here, a sudden illness there, one particularly suspicious house fire in Cleveland that had made regional news. Holy shit, Marion whispered, staring at her screen like she'd just uncovered evidence of a serial killer, which honestly might not have been far from the truth. Marcus, this woman is bad news. Like, legitimately dangerous bad news. She's never been formally charged with anything because apparently she's smart enough to cover her tracks, but the pattern is pretty damn clear. She finds people with assets, gains their trust, helps them restructure their finances, and then those people conveniently die and she walks away with a cut of whatever's left. I felt like I might throw up, which would have been embarrassing in Marion's tiny office, but also somewhat understandable given the circumstances. So Laura's not just planning to kill me on her own. She's got a professional criminal helping her? That's actually worse somehow. Like, I could almost understand a crime of passion or a spontaneous bad decision, but this is premeditated murder with a consultant. That's like MBA-level evil. Marion printed out everything she could find. Emails, news articles, public records showing Harding's various business registrations, and the mysterious deaths of her associates. The pile of evidence looked like something you'd see in a detective's office in a TV show, and I half expected someone to walk in with a cork board and red string to start mapping out connections. We found bank records showing that Laura had been transferring money to an account linked to Harding, small amounts at first, but gradually increasing over the past 6 months. We found searches in Laura's browser history about life insurance policies, cognitive decline symptoms, and, this one really got me, how long does it take to settle an estate in Maine? She's been planning this for months, I said, staring at the evidence spread across Marion's desk. This isn't some impulsive decision. She's been systematically setting everything up, probably since around the time she met this Harding woman. How did I not notice? How did I not see that something was wrong? Marion put her hand on my shoulder in that comforting way that people do when they're trying to make you feel better but don't actually know what to say. Because you trusted her, Marcus. Because you're a normal person who doesn't assume your spouse is capable of murder. That's not a character flaw. That's called being a decent human being who operates under the assumption that most people aren't homicidal maniacs. We spent another hour documenting everything, making copies, scanning documents, and basically building a case file that would make a prosecutor weep with joy. Marion suggested I take everything to the police immediately, but I hesitated because I knew how this would look. A paranoid husband accusing his wife based on some scheduled messages and circumstantial connections to a woman with a sketchy past. I needed more. I needed something concrete and undeniable, something that would prove beyond any doubt that Laura and this Harding woman were actively planning my murder and not just having weird hypothetical conversations about estate planning. I need to meet this Harding woman, I said finally, and Marion looked at me like I'd just announced I was going to juggle chainsaws while riding a unicycle. I know it sounds crazy, but if I can get her talking, maybe record a conversation or get her to admit something, then we'd have real evidence. Right now, all we have is suspicious patterns and concerning messages. I need proof. Marion argued with me for about 20 minutes, pointing out very reasonably that confronting a potential murderer was generally considered a bad idea and possibly suicidal. But I was determined. Because survival isn't just about hiding from danger. It's about facing it head-on with evidence, documentation, and hopefully a really good recording device. I left the library with a folder full of evidence that felt like it weighed about 1,000 pounds, even though it was probably just 20 or 30 pages of printed documents and screenshots. And I spent the rest of the morning at a coffee shop planning my next move like I was some kind of amateur detective instead of an insurance risk assessor whose biggest professional thrill usually involved calculating premium adjustments. My phone buzzed around 11 with a text from Laura that made my blood pressure spike so fast I probably could have powered a small generator. Dr. Patterson wants to see you today at 2 p.m. He has an opening and thinks we should do that cognitive assessment we talked about. I already confirmed you'd be there. Love you. We hadn't talked about any cognitive assessment. I mean, she'd mentioned my supposed forgetfulness at dinner, but we definitely hadn't had a conversation about scheduling doctor's appointments, which was classic Laura behavior, except now it felt sinister instead of just her usual tendency to make decisions and inform me about them afterward. Dr. Patterson was our family physician, a guy I'd been seeing for routine checkups for the past decade. And he seemed like a perfectly normal doctor who occasionally made dad jokes and had a framed picture of himself holding a fish on his office wall. The idea that he might be involved in this scheme seemed ridiculous, but then again, everything about this situation seemed ridiculous, so I wasn't ruling anything out. I texted back a simple, "Okay, see you there," because what else was I going to say? No thanks. I'm pretty sure this is part of a plot to establish that I'm mentally incompetent so you can murder me with plausible deniability. That seemed like it might tip my hand a bit too early. Instead, I called Marion and told her what was happening, and she immediately went into research mode, which is apparently what librarians do when their friends are potentially being set up for medical fraud and murder. "I'm looking up Dr. Patterson right now," she said, and I could hear her typing furiously in the background. "Let me see if there's anything sketchy in his history, any malpractice suits or complaints or connections to your wife or this Harding woman. Give me 20 minutes. 20 minutes later, she called back, sounding frustrated. "He's clean as far as I can tell. Good reviews. No complaints. Board certified. All the usual credentials that suggest he's a legitimate doctor and not some quack who's helping wives murder their husbands. But that doesn't mean Laura hasn't gotten to him somehow. Maybe she's offering him money, or maybe she's manipulating him into thinking you really are sick. You need to be careful, Marcus. If he's documenting that you have cognitive decline, that's evidence that can be used against you later." I drove home to pick up Laura for the appointment because apparently we were going together, which made sense if this was all part of her plan, but was incredibly awkward given that I now knew she was trying to kill me. She was waiting by the door when I arrived, looking concerned in that wifely way that probably would have seemed sweet a few days ago, but now just looked calculating. "I'm glad you're taking this seriously," she said as we got in the car. "I know you think I'm being paranoid, but I've been really worried about you, honey. You haven't been yourself lately." I wanted to scream that of course I hadn't been myself because I discovered my wife was plotting my murder, but instead I just nodded and said something non-committal about how I'd been stressed with work, which was actually true even though work stress was currently the least of my problems. We drove to Dr. Patterson's office in silence, Laura occasionally glancing at me with what looked like genuine concern, but might have been her mentally calculating how much longer she had to maintain this charade. The waiting room was standard medical office decor, outdated magazines, uncomfortable chairs, a receptionist who looked like she'd rather be literally anywhere else, and that weird smell that all doctors' offices have that's part antiseptic and part despair. We checked in, and within 10 minutes, a nurse called my name and led us back to an examination room where Dr. Patterson was waiting with a clipboard and a smile that seemed a little too practiced. "Marcus, Laura, good to see you both," he said, shaking my hand with that firm grip that doctors learn in medical school to project confidence and competence. "Laura called me earlier this week expressing some concerns about your memory and cognitive function, and I thought it would be good to do a thorough assessment just to establish a baseline and make sure everything's okay." Earlier this week, so she'd been setting this up before the phone incident, which meant I'd just stumbled onto her plan by accident when I decided to be a helpful husband. The irony was almost funny, except it really wasn't. I sat down in the examination chair while Dr. Patterson pulled out what looked like a standardized cognitive assessment form, and Laura sat in the corner looking supportive and worried like she'd rehearsed this performance in a mirror. "I'm going to ask you a series of questions, Marcus," Dr. Patterson said, clicking his pen in that annoying way that some people do. "Simple stuff, nothing to worry about. What's today's date?" "November 3rd, 2025. I answered immediately, because unlike whatever narrative Laura had been spinning, my brain worked just fine and I wasn't about to fail some basic memory test. He nodded and made a note, and we continued through the assessment, counting backward from 100 by sevens, remembering a list of words he gave me, drawing a clock showing a specific time, all the standard tests they use to check for dementia or cognitive impairment. I aced every single one, answering quickly and accurately, and I could see Dr. Patterson's expression shift from professional neutrality to something that looked like confusion. Meanwhile, Laura was sitting in the corner, and I noticed her smile getting tighter with each correct answer I gave, like she was watching her carefully constructed plan unravel in real time. Well, Marcus, I have to say your cognitive function appears to be completely normal, Dr. Patterson said, flipping through his notes with a frown. Actually, you scored higher than average on several of these assessments. Your memory is sharp, your reasoning is sound, and I'm not seeing any indicators of decline or impairment. I watched Laura's face carefully, and for just a second, I saw something flicker there, annoyance maybe, or frustration, before she covered it with concerned confusion. But doctor, what about all the things I told you about? The forgetfulness, the confusion, the incidents at home. Dr. Patterson looked between us, and I could see him doing the mental calculation that doctors do when they realize something doesn't add up. Mrs. Turner, based on this assessment and my examination, I'm not finding any evidence to support those concerns. In fact, Marcus seems perfectly healthy from a cognitive standpoint. This was my moment, and I decided to take the shot because if Eddie and Marion had taught me anything over the past 24 hours, it was that sometimes you need to go on the offensive instead of just defending yourself. I pulled out my phone, not Laura's, but mine, and opened up the photos I'd taken of her scheduled messages. Dr. Patterson, I need to ask you something. Have you already created medical records documenting cognitive decline for me? Because my wife has been sending scheduled messages to people claiming I have dementia, and I'm wondering if you've been part of establishing that false medical history. The room went completely silent except for the annoying hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. Dr. Patterson's face went pale, then red, then pale again, cycling through colors like a malfunctioning traffic light. Laura stood up, so fast her chair scraped against the floor with that awful sound that makes your teeth hurt. Marcus, what are you talking about? Why would you say something like that? I'm saying it because I found your phone, Laura. I know about the messages. I know about L. Harding. I know about the whole plan. I turned back to Dr. Patterson, who looked like he wanted to melt into the floor and disappear. So I'll ask again, doctor. Have you been creating false medical records? Because that's fraud, and it's also illegal, and I have a lawyer friend who would be very interested in discussing it with you. I didn't actually have a lawyer friend, but it sounded good, and more importantly, it had the desired effect. Dr. Patterson started stammering something about misunderstanding and patient confidentiality, and then he did something that confirmed everything I'd suspected. He grabbed a file from his desk with my name on it and tried to shove it into his desk drawer. But I was faster, probably fueled by adrenaline and rage and the kind of desperate energy that comes from realizing your doctor has been falsifying your medical records to help your wife kill you. I snatched the file before he could hide it and flipped it open to find exactly what I'd feared. Detailed notes about my supposed cognitive decline, observations about memory loss and confusion, recommendations for further testing, all dated over the past month. Notes about appointments that never happened and symptoms I'd never exhibited. It was a complete fabrication, a carefully constructed medical paper trail that would have made my eventual death look like a tragic but expected outcome of a degenerative disease. You've been creating fake medical records, I said, my voice shaking with anger. You've been documenting appointments that never occurred and symptoms I never had. That's medical fraud, Dr. Patterson. That's the kind of thing that gets you sued and loses you your license and possibly puts you in jail. The doctor looked like he might cry, which was pathetic but also kind of satisfying. She said you were in denial about your condition. She said you'd refused to come in for testing, and she needed documentation to help get you into treatment. I was trying to help. Help? I laughed, and it came out harsh and bitter. You were helping her set me up to be murdered, you idiot. Did she pay you? Or did she just convince you that you were doing a good deed by falsifying medical records for a patient who was perfectly healthy? Laura had been quiet during this exchange, but now she stepped forward with her hands up in what I guess was supposed to be a calming gesture. Marcus, honey, you're not making sense. You're clearly upset and confused. Maybe we should. Don't. I cut her off, backing toward the door with the file clutched in my hand. Don't you dare try to gaslight me right now, Laura. I have evidence. I have your messages, your emails, your connection to Lydia Harding, and now I have proof that you've been working with Dr. Patterson here to create a false medical history. It's over. I walked out of that office with the file, leaving behind a panicking doctor and a wife whose carefully constructed murder plot had just exploded in her face like a cartoon bomb. And for the first time in days, I felt like maybe I wasn't completely helpless in this nightmare scenario. Dr. Patterson didn't try to stop me, probably because he was too busy contemplating the end of his career, and Laura didn't follow me, which was honestly a relief because I didn't know what I'd do if she tried to maintain the charade any longer. As I drove away, I called Marion. I need you to add medical fraud to our evidence pile, I said, because apparently my wife bribed my doctor, and I just stole my own fabricated medical records. This day just keeps getting better and better. After the disaster at Dr. Patterson's office, I spent about an hour driving around Portland with no particular destination in mind, just processing the fact that my family doctor had been actively participating in what was essentially a conspiracy to make my murder look like a natural death, which seemed like the kind of thing that should require more than just a bribe or some sob story from my wife. I ended up parking at the waterfront, staring at the boats bobbing in the harbor and eating a sad sandwich from a convenience store while I figured out my next move. The file from Patterson's office was sitting on my passenger seat like a ticking time bomb, full of fake medical assessments and fraudulent documentation that would have destroyed my credibility if Laura had managed to actually go through with her plan. The whole thing made me feel violated in a way I couldn't quite articulate, like someone had stolen my identity, but instead of racking up credit card debt, they were just trying to make me look insane before killing me. Marion called around to check on me, probably worried I'd done something stupid like confronted Laura directly or driven my car into the ocean, both of which had briefly crossed my mind as viable options. I'm fine, I told her, which was a lie, but the kind of lie you tell when you're not actually fine but don't want people to worry. I need to find Lydia Harding. If Laura's the one pulling the trigger, Harding's the one who loaded the gun and pointed it in my direction. I need to understand what I'm actually dealing with here. Marion had already anticipated this request because she's psychic or just knows me too well, and she'd spent the afternoon tracking down Harding's current location using library databases, social media, and what I suspected was probably some mildly illegal hacking. Turns out the woman wasn't even trying to hide. She had a downtown condo in one of those new luxury buildings that look like they're made entirely of glass and the crushed dreams of people who can't afford to live there. Her LinkedIn profile described her as a financial restructuring consultant, which is apparently professional code for, I help people steal money and occasionally murder their business partners. Marcus, I really don't think you should go alone, Marion said, her voice tight with concern. This woman is dangerous. She's been connected to at least 3 suspicious deaths that we know about, and probably more that never made the news. What are you going to do? Just knock on her door and ask her to confess to conspiracy to commit murder? That's exactly what I'm going to do, I said, because apparently discovering that your wife wants you dead does something to your sense of self-preservation. But I'm going to record the conversation, and I'm going to be smart about it. I just need her to talk, to give me something concrete that proves she and Laura are actively planning this. Right now, I have suspicious messages and a sketchy background, but I need actual evidence of intent. I stopped at an electronics store on my way to Harding's building and bought one of those digital voice recorders that people use for lectures or meetings, the kind that's small enough to fit in your shirt pocket and supposedly has excellent audio quality. The teenager working the register looked at me like I was either a spy or just incredibly boring, and I didn't bother explaining that I was actually just a middle-aged guy trying not to get murdered by his wife and her criminal consultant. I also bought a cheap button-down shirt with a front pocket specifically designed to hide the recorder because apparently I was committing fully to this amateur detective routine. Harding's building had that kind of modern lobby that's all marble and chrome and uncomfortable designer furniture that looks expensive but feels like sitting on geometric shapes, with a doorman who seemed like he took his job way too seriously for someone whose primary responsibility was opening doors and judging people. I told him I was there to see Lydia Harding for a business consultation, which was technically true even if the business in question was my attempted murder, and he called up to her unit with the kind of professional courtesy that suggested she paid her HOA fees on time and probably tipped well during the holidays. MS. Harding says you can go up, he informed me, gesturing toward the elevator like he was directing traffic at a funeral. 23rd floor, Unit 2304. The elevator ride gave me just enough time to question every decision that had led me to this moment and to triple-check that the recorder in my pocket was actually working, which it was, capturing every awkward breath and probably the sound of my heart trying to escape through my ribcage. When the doors opened on the 23rd floor, I stepped out into a hallway that smelled like expensive carpet and other people's money, and I found Unit 2304 at the end with a brass number plate that probably cost more than my monthly car payment. Lydia Harding answered the door before I could even knock, which was unsettling in that specific way that makes you wonder if people have been watching you through the peephole. She was probably in her late 40s, dressed in one of those effortlessly elegant outfits that women wear when they want to look casual, but have actually spent 45 minutes choosing the perfect combination of expensive athleisure wear. Her dark hair was pulled back in a sleek ponytail, and she had the kind of smile that probably worked really well on people who didn't know she was potentially a serial killer. "Marcus Turner," she said, like we were old friends instead of complete strangers connected only by the fact that she was helping my wife plot my demise. "I've been expecting you. Please, come in." The condo was exactly what you'd expect from someone who makes their living through financial fraud and accessory to murder. Minimalist furniture, abstract art that probably cost a fortune but looked like something a toddler could have made, and floor-to-ceiling windows with a view of the harbor that would have been breathtaking if I wasn't terrified. She gestured for me to sit on a white leather couch that looked like it had never been actually used for sitting, and she settled into an armchair across from me with the kind of relaxed confidence that comes from either yoga or sociopathy. "Can I get you something to drink?" she offered, and I almost laughed because accepting beverages from someone who's helping plan your murder seemed like Darwin Award territory. "I'm good, thanks," I said, trying to match her casual tone even though my hands were sweating enough to leave marks on her expensive couch. "I appreciate you agreeing to meet with me. I'm guessing Laura told you I might be stopping by." Harding's smile widened slightly, and she crossed her legs in that deliberate way that people do when they're comfortable holding all the power in a conversation. "Laura's been keeping me updated on the situation, yes. She mentioned you found her phone and that you've been asking questions. I have to admire your resourcefulness, Marcus. Most men in your position would have just confronted their wives directly and ended up looking paranoid and unstable. But you've been smart about it. Gathering evidence, doing research, building a case. It's almost admirable." The recorder in my pocket was capturing every word, and I silently thanked whatever electronics gods existed that the audio quality was good. "So you admit you've been working with Laura? Helping her plan? What exactly?" She laughed, which was somehow worse than if she'd been cold and threatening. "Oh, Marcus, let's not play games. You know exactly what we've been planning. You found the messages, you talked to Dr. Patterson, you've clearly done your homework. The question isn't what we're planning. The question is what you're going to do about it." I forced myself to stay calm, to keep her talking, because every word she said was evidence that could potentially save my life. "I'm curious about something. Why do you do this? What do you get out of helping people murder their spouses? Is it just the money, or is there something else?" Harding leaned forward slightly, and her expression shifted from amused to something more serious, almost businesslike. "It's not about the money, although that's certainly a nice bonus. It's about helping people solve problems that they can't solve on their own. Your wife, for instance, she's been unhappy for years, trapped in a marriage that doesn't fulfill her, tied to a life she never really wanted. But divorce is messy and expensive, and in her case, it wouldn't give her the financial freedom she needs to start over. So I provide a solution that's cleaner and more profitable for everyone involved. Everyone except me," I pointed out, which seemed like an important distinction. She shrugged with the kind of casual indifference that made my skin crawl. "You're collateral damage, Marcus. Nothing personal. You've been a good husband by all accounts. Reliable, responsible, boring. But boring doesn't pay for the lifestyle Laura wants, and it certainly doesn't spark passion or excitement. She's ready to move on. and I'm helping facilitate that transition. By killing me and stealing my life insurance, I said flatly. By helping her access resources that are technically half hers anyway. Harding corrected, like we were discussing a business merger instead of murder. The insurance is just a bonus, really. The real money is in your company's shares, in the house, and the various accounts you've accumulated over the years. Laura's put in 17 years of her life with you. She deserves compensation for that investment. I felt anger rising in my chest, hot and sharp, but I forced it down because losing my temper wouldn't help me here. And what about after? What happens to Laura once I'm dead and she's collected everything? Harding's smile returned, and this time it had an edge to it that made me understand exactly how dangerous this woman was. That depends entirely on how cooperative she continues to be. Ideally, we maintain our business relationship and I help her manage her newfound wealth. But if she becomes difficult or threatening or decides she doesn't need my services anymore. She trailed off meaningfully, and I understood what she wasn't saying. You kill her too, I said. That's what happened to your other partners, isn't it? You help them murder their spouses, take your cut, and then eliminate them once they're no longer useful. She didn't deny it, which was somehow more chilling than if she'd gotten angry or defensive. I prefer to think of it as tying up loose ends. People get sloppy after they've committed murder. They start talking, getting guilty, making mistakes. It's cleaner if there's only one person who knows the full story. And that person is you. Exactly. She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the harbor with her back to me. Here's what I'm willing to offer you, Marcus, because I like you and I think you're smarter than Laura gives you credit for. You can work with me instead of against me. We eliminate Laura, tragic accident, maybe a home invasion gone wrong, and we split everything 50-50. You get to live, you get your money, and you never have to worry about someone trying to kill you again. I sat there stunned, trying to process the fact that this woman had just casually offered to help me murder my wife in exchange for half of everything we owned. You want me to betray Laura and help you kill her? I want you to survive, Harding corrected, turning back to face me. And I'm offering you the best possible outcome for this situation. Otherwise, I'm afraid we'll have to proceed with the original plan, and that doesn't end well for you. I stood up slowly, making sure the recorder was still safely hidden in my pocket. I'll think about it, I said, which was the same thing I'd probably said a million times in business meetings when I meant absolutely not, but didn't want to burn bridges. Don't think too long, Harding said as she walked me to the door. Time is a luxury you don't really have anymore, Marcus. I left Harding's building feeling like I'd just had a conversation with the devil wearing Lululemon and drinking overpriced kombucha, and I sat in my car for a solid 10 minutes, just staring at the steering wheel and trying to process the fact that I'd been offered a deal to murder my own wife by the woman who was currently helping her murder me, which felt like some kind of twisted moral philosophy question that would make Socrates need therapy. The recording device in my pocket felt like it was burning a hole through my shirt, even though it was just plastic and circuitry, but it represented something important. Actual evidence of conspiracy, intent, and premeditated murder that even the most skeptical cop would have to take seriously. I drove to the waterfront pier because apparently that had become my go-to spot for existential crises and life-altering decisions, and I sat on a bench watching seagulls fight over discarded French fries while I tried to figure out what the hell I was supposed to do next. My phone buzzed with a text from Laura asking where I was and when I'd be home for dinner, which felt surreal given that she was actively planning my death and I'd just been offered the opportunity to return the favor. I texted back something vague about running errands and needing time to think, which was the understatement of the century, but seemed safer than, I'm sitting on a pier contemplating whether to go to the police or just disappear to Mexico and start a new life as someone who sells handmade hammocks to tourists. My phone rang, and I saw my son Evan's name pop up on the screen, which immediately made my stomach drop because I hadn't talked to him since this whole nightmare started, and I suddenly wondered what Laura had been telling our kids. Evan was 26, living in Boston with his girlfriend, working some tech job that I didn't fully understand, but that seemed to involve a lot of video conferences and craft beer. He was a good kid. Well, good adult now. And the thought that Laura might be poisoning him against me made me angrier than almost anything else in this situation. Hey, Dad, he said when I answered, and his voice had that careful tone that people use when they're about to deliver bad news or ask uncomfortable questions. "How are you doing? Mom called me yesterday and said some stuff that got me worried." Of course she did. Because why just plan your husband's murder when you can also systematically turn his children against him by suggesting he's losing his mind? "What did she say exactly?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral even though I wanted to scream. There was a pause, and I could practically hear Evan choosing his words carefully. "She said you've been having memory problems, that you've been forgetting things and getting confused, and that she's worried you might have early dementia or something. She wanted me to be prepared for the possibility that you might need care soon, and she asked if I'd noticed anything weird when we talked last month." I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, counting to 10 like my therapist had taught me back when my biggest problem was work stress and not my wife's elaborate murder plot. "Evan, I need you to listen to me very carefully, and I need you to trust me. I don't have dementia. I don't have memory problems. My brain works perfectly fine, and I can prove it if necessary. What I do have is a wife who's been working with a criminal consultant to make it look like I'm mentally incompetent so that when I die mysteriously, everyone will think it was a tragic but expected outcome of a degenerative disease." The silence on the other end of the line lasted so long that I thought maybe the call had dropped, but then Evan said, "Dad, that's insane. Are you hearing yourself right now? That sounds exactly like something someone with paranoid delusions would say." "I know how it sounds," I said, and I could hear the desperation creeping into my voice. "I know it sounds completely crazy, and that's exactly why Laura's plan was so brilliant. But I have evidence, Evan. I have recorded conversations, scheduled messages, fake medical records, connections to a woman who's been involved in multiple suspicious deaths. I'm not making this up, and I'm not losing my mind. Your mother is trying to kill me, and she's been setting up an elaborate cover story to make sure she gets away with it." Another long pause, and then, "Can you prove it? Like, actually prove it with real evidence that isn't just you connecting dots that might not be connected?" I thought about the folder full of documents sitting in my car, the recording I'd just made with Harding, the fake medical file from Dr. Patterson, and all the research Marion had compiled. "Yes, I can prove it. But I need you to trust me until I can show you everything, and I need you to not tell your mother that we had this conversation, because if she knows I'm building a case, she might accelerate her timeline." Evan sighed heavily, and I imagined him running his hand through his hair the way he always did when he was stressed, a habit he'd inherited from me. "Okay, I trust you, Dad, even though this is the weirdest conversation we've ever had, and I'm genuinely concerned about everyone's mental health right now. What do you need me to do?" "Nothing yet," I told him. "Just be ready in case I need you to verify that I'm not actually losing my mind. And maybe don't eat anything your mother cooks for you in the near future, just to be safe." He laughed nervously at that, which was probably the only appropriate response to your father suggesting your mother might poison you. We talked for a few more minutes, mostly me reassuring him that I was taking this seriously and handling it responsibly. And by the time we hung up, I felt slightly better knowing that at least one of my kids might believe me when this whole thing eventually blew up. I called Marion next because she'd become my unofficial co-conspirator in this disaster, and she answered on the first ring like she'd been waiting by her phone. "Tell me you didn't do anything stupid with Harding," she said immediately. "Define stupid," I replied, and I heard her groan. I got her on tape admitting to everything. The plan to kill me, her history of eliminating her business partners, and she even offered to help me murder Laura instead, which was a twist I genuinely didn't see coming. Marion let out a noise that was half laugh and half horrified shriek. "She offered to help you kill your wife? Marcus, this woman is completely unhinged. We need to go to the police right now, tonight, with everything we have. This has gone way past the point where you can handle it yourself." She was right, obviously, but I hesitated because I knew how this would play out. I'd go to the police with my story about my wife trying to kill me. They'd interview Laura, who would cry and talk about how worried she's been about my mental health. And even with the evidence I had, there was a chance they'd see me as a paranoid husband having a breakdown rather than a victim of an elaborate murder plot. "I need to make sure we have everything documented properly," I said. "I need to organize all the evidence so it's clear and undeniable. And then we go to the police together with a complete case that they can't ignore or dismiss." Marion agreed reluctantly, and we spent the next 3 hours at her house organizing everything into a coherent narrative that would make sense to someone who wasn't already living this nightmare. We created a timeline starting from when Laura first met Harding 6 months ago, tracking her suspicious financial transactions, the gradual setup of the fake medical narrative, the scheduled messages that were designed to establish my cognitive decline, and culminating in the recorded conversation with Harding admitting to conspiracy to commit murder. We printed out emails, bank statements, news articles about Harding's previous victims, and Dr. Patterson's fraudulent medical records. By the time we finished, we had a 3-inch thick binder that looked like something a federal prosecutor would use in a RICO case. "This is solid," Marion said, flipping through the organized evidence with an expression that mixed pride with horror. "This is really, genuinely solid evidence of conspiracy to commit murder and fraud. The police can't ignore this, Marcus. They'll have to take it seriously." My phone buzzed with another text from Laura, this one more insistent. "Marcus, where are you? I'm getting worried. Please come home. We need to talk." We need to talk part sent chills down my spine because that phrase has never meant anything good in the history of marriage. And given current circumstances, it probably meant she was ready to move forward with whatever method of murder she'd settled on. "I can't go home," I said, showing Marion the text. If she's texting me about needing to talk, that means something's changed. Maybe Harding told her about my visit, or maybe she figured out that I stole the medical records from Patterson. Either way, going home right now feels like walking into a trap. Marion nodded and started packing up the evidence binder. "Then we go to the police station right now. Tonight. We present everything. We file a formal complaint, and we let them handle it from here. You can stay at my place tonight if you need to, and we'll figure out protective custody or restraining orders